Hello and welcome to Notes and Chords, the Hindu's new series on appreciating music. This is Meera Srinivasan from The Hindu. In this series, launching around the much celebrated December music season or Margazhi festival in Chennai, we will regularly feature conversations with artists, practitioners, and music buffs on how to better appreciate music. We will bring to you perspectives from both seasoned artists as well as young musicians who are experimenting with exciting new formats and collaborations. Stay in tune. So, joining us today is Navaneeth Unnikrishnan, a young musician based in New York. Navneet was born in Arizona in the United States to parents who migrated from Kerala in India. He is 20 now and a junior at the New York University, where he studies data science. When he is not plowing through data or algorithms, Navneet is usually practicing his music lessons or playing his keyboard to crack an old film melody. He has been training both in Hindustani and Carnatic music, and his social media posts unpacking old Malayalam melodies of iconic composers like Devarajan Master and M.S. Baburaj have drawn a huge following. His ability to explain complex film compositions, breaking down their classical elements and tracing them to known and lesser known ragas has won him many fans and accolades. Thank you so much for joining us from New York, Navneet. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mira, for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Great. So, Navneet, let's start from your own vantage point. You have been based in the US and you have been training in two complex Indian classical forms. So, what really prompted you to learn Hindustani music and more recently Carnatic music? And are you also dabbling with other forms, say Western classical and so on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. But I guess kind of to start off with an explanation about how I got into learning classical music specifically. So from a young age itself, I was always interested in music. I was always singing or tapping my feet to something, right? From a very, very young age. As young as like probably 1 or even a few months younger than that. So my parents getting kind of inspired by that, since we used to listen to a lot of music, both my dad and mom felt that it was pretty necessary to put me through some form of training. So I was in Arizona at the time. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. So we ended up having a few Hindustani and Carnatic teachers, much less than now. At that point, this was 2008, 2009, and that's how kind of I got started into Hindustani music. That was under Dr. Vijayashree Sharma. So that was where kind of my training started officially in Indian classical music at the age of 4. So the reason for why I kind of decided to learn Hindustani music, and more importantly, and more recently Carnatic music, was primarily just to absorb different forms of music and to gain an understanding and appreciation for those forms of music as well, right? Because understanding Indian classical music, I mean, it's like an ocean, right? So the more you explore it, the more you realize you don't know about different concepts or different ragas or different talas. I mean, it's such a wide encompassing discipline. So to learn that is a privilege in and of itself. And I think once you learn more and more of Carnatic music, and once you learn more and more of Hindustani music, you begin to understand other concepts of general music as a whole in a much better way. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Right, right. No, definitely, definitely. So, as someone, practicing two comparable but very distinct and, as you say, complex styles like Hindustani and Carnatic, whether it's the structure of a raga or scale, the treatment of notes, the character of the sound, it's quite different, right? So, how would you describe these two forms to someone who may not be familiar with them?
That's a that's a good question as well. I think describing a raga or like a treatment of notes to someone who's not familiar with the Indian classical music genre or scene, for me, the way I kind of see a raga is almost like drawing a picture, right? The notes are the canvas, and then the way you sing the raga is almost how you how you delineate it, how you sing it, how you approach it in your own way. Like if I were to sing a raga like Mohanam in Carnatic, or Bhupali in Hindustani, like singing those notes, it's just sa re ga pa da sa sada pagari sa. But if you took a kriti like Mohana Rama, Mohana Rama, Mohana Rama, Mukhajita Soma. The emotions that you apply to those notes, that's what constitutes the raga, I think, in its finest essence. At least that's what I try to do. Especially for someone who's not familiar, from a more technical standpoint, the raga is equivalent to the mode in Carnatic music, the mode in Western music. So like Kalyani as a raga is equivalent to Lydian mode, or Mixolydian mode in Western music. So it's the same notes, but obviously different syllabic words to represent those notes as well. So in Western music, you have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and then Carnatic music, you have sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa, Sani da ba ma ga ri sa. So the way you approach those notes, the way you sing those notes, ga ma pa ma ga ma pa sa ni da ba ma ga bhakti bhikshami yave bhavuk mahu sadvika bhakti bhikshami yave those, I think, singing those notes with those variations, those emotions, like I said, you're literally trying to paint on a canvas when you're singing raga labana, right? Because you're going through all the different variations of it. So I think that's what I would try to describe it as to a non-listener of Indian classical music. That helps.
Right. No, that was fascinating and lovely metaphor too, Navneet. Thank you for that. So I think when you demonstrated the do re mi set of notes and the sarigama padanisa, the striking contrast maybe for a listener is how you treat particular notes. So I remember that my teacher Lalgudi Jaraman sir used to say that in the classical system sometimes the notes fall between the black and white key you see on the piano. It's if it's a straight note it would land perfectly on those, but sometimes we are oscillating it, or you are giving a certain kind of a vibration, or a what we call a gamakam in a classical system, right? So do you want to
Yes.
talk a little about how the western system foregrounds straight notes a lot more, and the Indian classical forms and particularly Carnatic music draws a lot from this concept of gamakas?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to talk about Hindustani music as
Sure,
well to
sure,
the
please.
best of my knowledge, but with since that's what I know more, but with the difference between, I know you asked that in the last question as well, so I wanted to get to it here, but and address it. But with Western music, you have chord progressions, right? So you have like the C minor chord progression, or like the augmented chord progression of like a specific like the D chord progression, things like that, from a general standpoint. And the way those notes, the you're asking about the way, the difference in which the notes are sung from a Western classical music
That's
standpoint
right.
versus Carnatic, right?
Yes.
So with Carnatic, I mean, as Lal Guriji put it the best, it's ornamented with gamagas, right? Especially when you're singing Raga Rapanam, or Kalpana Swaras, like if you sing a Kriti, like Ramanannu Brovara Gari Sagari Ga Ramanannu Brovara Ramanannu Brovara Ramanannu Brova Magari Sagari Ga. That oscillation between the re and the ga, I mean, that's one of the most essential parts of Harikamboji, right? Especially as a listener, once you, I mean, not one of the most identifying parts, but when you listen to a Kriti, it's like even singing like Mohare Rama before Rama like it oscillates, it oscillates between the Rishabha and the Gandharam, right? So I think that's the beauty of Carnatic music. Even Kalyani, when you sing Sari ga ma pa ma pada ni sa ni da pa ma ga re sa. That Pradimadhyamam is almost touching the pa, but it's not. Compared to Yaman in Hindustani, when you sing it, it's much different because you start from ni re ga ma. Madani sani da pa ma pa ma ga re sa, because that ma is less close to the pa than it is in Carnatic music. That tivra madhyamam, as we call the pradimadhyam equivalent. So I mean, it's the and in Hindustani music when you sing it, you have concepts like murki, harkat, and specifically the meend as well. Especially when you sing, you glide from one note to another. That's what meend is from a technical standpoint. Like if you do something, if you sing a raga like Malkones, like Eri Sakhi Sakhi Rimaka Karu So you kind of glide gradually from one note to another, and especially in the slower khyal, the bara khyal, you see a lot of mean being exercised by some of the most between I mean by all the esteemed Hindustani classical vocalists and instrumentalists as well when they perform a ghat. And then with Western music, obviously differences, yeah, like I said before, chord progressions, and you have sometimes straighter notes. That doesn't mean that you have a lack of straighter notes in Hindustani or Carnatic music as well. Like if you sing, I mean, in Kradis, you have straight notes, you have gamagams, you have all types of things within that, right? And in Western music, it's just a little more predominant with, because like if you, especially with like film songs or whatnot, you see a lot of the mix of that. You see
Right.
Carnatic ragas being mixed with Western chord progressions, Western styles of melodies and whatnot, and especially in Malayalam, like Devaraja Master, Babu Kam, S. Baburaj, Dakshamurti Swami, Johnson Master, they exercise that to the maximum extent. So yeah.
Right, I was going to come to that. Thank you, Navneet, and really appreciated the way you, demonstrated the gamakam or the quintessential sound of Carnatic, and also the way the notes glide through and journey from one position to another in the Hindustani malkones that you demonstrated. Thank you for that. And as you said, yes, in our systems too, in Indian classical systems too, there's a lot of juxtaposition, right? Like sometimes there is a very, very emphatic straight note from which another oscillating note takes off or provides a contrast in sound, which is really beautiful. And you captured some of that. So you spoke about, old film songs and how, masters have really employed classical tunes, but also used Western chord progressions and say harmonies or other devices to enhance sound and come up with really interesting, fascinating musical pieces. So you've been looking at old film songs also, I'm assuming, through your own lens of classical training. So is there a film song that you think captures the essence of a particular raga, or offers an unconventional take and something that you like referencing here?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, especially with old both Malayalam and Tamil film songs. I think there's a plethora of those compositions that capture the beauty and the emotions and the elan of a raga, right, so to say. And I think there's a lot of those compositions. I think some of my favorite compositions, since you're asking, I think there's a lot, but definitely within Malayalam, if we're speaking about Devaraja Master, I mean, he used the maximum number of ragas, around 120 to 130 ragas, and within that, he used Begada in a composition like Ambala Parambile Ramatile ചെമ്പരത്തി പൂവേ അംഗചമയത്തിലണിയാനിത്തിരി സിന്ദൂരമുണ്ടോ സിന്ദൂരം അമ്പലപ്പറമ്പിലെ ആരാമത്തിലെ ചെമ്പരത്തി പൂവേ. Because when I hear this I actually think of like a few Kridis in Beggar. I don't know them all that well. It's mainly just through
Sure.
hearing it from other masters I know, like Anudinamunuka Umaya, the Puchi Srinivasa Iyengar Kriti, or even Abhimanaminna, like I think that's by Patnam Subramanyar, if I'm not wrong. Like those Kritis, I think of those Kritis, and then I think of Begara from Devaraja Master's perspective as well, right? And actually, to pick one song, I will say my all-time favorite film song within this raga, it's Karahara Priya as a raga, is another Devaraja Master classic, Samya Maganurudyaname. I'll sing a little bit of it.
Please.
Mm, mm, Samya Maganurudyaname കൽപകോദ്യാനമേ നിന്റെ കഥകളി മുദ്രയാം കമലദളത്തിലെൻ ദേവിയുണ്ടോ ദേവി സാമ്യമകന്നോരുദ്യാനമേ കൽപകോദ്യാനമേ നിന്റെ കഥകളി മുദ്രയാം കമലദളത്തിലെൻ ദേവിയുണ്ടോ ദേവി സാമ്യമകന്നോരുദ്യാനമേ മഞ്ജുതരയുടെ മഞ്ഞിൽ മുങ്ങും കുഞ്ചകുടീരങ്ങളിൽ ലാവണ്യവതികൾ ലാളിച്ചു വളർത്തും ദേവഹംസങ്ങളെ നിങ്ങൾ ദൂതുപോയൊരു മനോരഥത്തിലെൻ ദേവിയുണ്ടോ ദേവി സാമ്യമകന്നോരുദ്യാനമേ. Sorry if that was a bit extended, but the reason for why this is one of my favorite songs in this raga as a film song, there's so many other compositions in Malayalam as well that have been composed brilliantly and sung brilliantly as well. But with this song, especially Devaraja Master and Yeshudasar's combo,
Oh, yeah.
the way just that Devi Re ga re re, that's a quintessential gamagam that's used in Karahara Priya. Like if you listen to like Chakkani Raja or Pakala Nilabadi. Like I mean, if you listen to those type of compositions and you notice the gamagams in those are very similar to how Devaraja Master employed them in uh, in Samyodhyaname. Like even Kalpagodhyaname re na 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 re ga ma pa da 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 ni da pa ma ma pa ni ma ni pa ga ri ga ma pa sari sa ga ri sari ga ma pa. He ends even that note on like one of those classic phrases of Karahara Priya, right? Because like the Samya Maganurudyaname. A lot of other film songs start in Karahara Priya, from what I've noticed in my humble opinion. They start from either Shadjam or Pa, like Pa Magari Gasa, or like Pa Dani Dama Pa. They start from those. But Devaraja Master was the first to Gama Pa Magari Sa Sa Sadani Sa Sadani Re Ga Sa Re Re Ma Pa Ga Re 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 Ga Ma Pa Da 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 Pa Da Ni Da Pa Ma. Na, 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 na. Those are all Carnatic gamagams, right? Because it's not
Right.
a note. It's, you cannot call it kafi raga, even though notes are the same. Even if kafi's the kone karera priya in Hindustani music, sa re ga ma pa da ni sa sa ni da ba ma ga re sa gavat kafi. Like that's a composition like I learned when I was young. You cannot call that similar to Samya Dhyana because the gamagams and the ornamentations are much different. Even like Devi Undo Devi you can sing that in Carnatic, but you cannot sing that in Kafi.
Right.
So that's one of my that's one film song I think that best exemplifies Karare Priya within a lighter setting.
No, wonderful. Thank you. And because you mentioned Yeshudas, sir, I was just thinking, sometimes this one song becomes like a bit of an imprint of a raga. And for me, that is Parandamir Patiriyum from Manichitratar. I mean,
Ahiri, yeah.
what an amazing take on Ahiri, and so intense. And in, of course, Yeshudas's voice, it's at another level, right? So, could you please, talk a little bit about that?
About the
About
Parandamar
that
Patir.
song and how you feel Ahiri is treated in that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think with Parandamar Patarim, I've never formally studied Ahiri. I've only heard of it. I know it's Vakula Bharanam's Janya. It's the Phrygian mode in what do you call it? In Western music. The reason like I was actually working with this is aside from like the Parandamar Patarim, but I was working to help compose with a friend on a film score, and so we were thinking of potential ideas, and it's a film about like Sri Lankan Tamil laborers that we were doing it on, and so we wanted to compose a background score and we needed a raga to fit it. And we picked Ahiri slash Vakula Bharnam to fit it. So I'm so glad you asked about that. But Ahiri, the way MG Radhakrishnan sir employed Ahiri, especially like it's a very it's a very deep raga from what I understand because you have like the Sari ma ga ma pa da ni sa. There's another really beautiful Malayalam film song in Ahiri, which is called Sundara Swapname. പൂത്താലമേന്തിയ താരകൾ നിൽക്കുന്ന ക്ഷേത്രാങ്കണങ്ങളിലൂടെ എന്നെ മറന്നു ഞാൻ എല്ലാം മറന്നു ഞാൻ എന്തിനു ചുറ്റിപ്പറന്നു same way when you listen to വിദൂരഗാനം വിരലിൽ നിന്നും വീണ പോലും മൗനമായി വിധുരയാമി വീണപൂവിൻ ഇതളണിഞ്ഞ നൊമ്പരം കൺമതിലും കാരിരുളും കണ്ടറിഞ്ഞ വിങ്ങലുകൾ പഴന്തമിഴ് പാട്ടിഴയും. You can see the usage of like those what do you call those kind of zigzag vakra notes even in the sari ma gari sani pa ni sani pa ma ga ga ma pa pa sani pa ma gari sani re sa param tamil പാട്ടിഴയും. So I mean I think just to give a little bit of a I guess brief discourse about that song, that's why I think it still resonates in the listeners' minds, you know.
Absolutely, because I've heard a lot of friends often, cite this song as their reference point for Ahiri, even when they're listening to, say, a Carnatic music
Oh,
concert. Hey, this sounds like.
Sompaina Manusuto. When you hear that
Absolutely.
and you hear this right afterwards, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, Sumpaina
Or
means
even
absolutely this beautiful Kriti, and yeah,
even just to add a further,
sure.
there's a Swaditirnal Padam. I don't know that one. Panimati Mukhi Bale.
Okay.
And even when I hear that, I think of this song. I think that's the beauty of film music as a whole, right? Especially a lot of old film songs. I mean, even post the Devaraja Master, Dakshamurti Swami era, you have M.G. Radhakrishnan sir, Johnson Master, Ravindra Master, and they used ragas in all sorts of ways, and they did beautiful things with it as well. So I think, and of course, Ilayaraja sir. I mean,
Absolutely.
the legend. I mean, he
Yeah.
did everything that he could, right? So yeah.
Yeah, as I think for people more familiar with the Tamil film music industry, it's either G. Ramanathan or MSV Ramamurthy or Ilayaraja or even A.R. Rahman sometimes say Kanna Muchi Enada or becomes
Yeah,
a reference
Natakunji.
point
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Natakurinji. And so in a sense, this brings me to this question that many people ask: how do you really identify a raga if you're really new to this listening space? So one is, of course, using familiar film songs as possible reference points. But if you were to take through somebody not so familiar with our systems, and but they are eager to crack this or get more familiar, how would
Sure.
you sort of guide them to understand or learn to identify a ragam?
That's a really good question. I think for me personally, it's come through training as well. I can give a few examples, but with there's a song in Malayalam called Chakravartini Ninakunyande.
Okay.
Chakravartini Ninakunyande Shilpagopuram Turannu. That's based in Rag Kedar, composed by G. Devaraja Master as well. And that was one of my kind of first gateways into getting into the intersection between ragas and film songs, because that was one of the first film songs that I heard in Kedar as well, and coincidentally I was learning the raga
Yeah.
from my guru at that point as well. So it worked out. But I think the best way to get into it is listening to definitely classical concerts, and then training. I think even if someone thinks that they're not a musician, I don't think that should necessarily stop them from training in music and studying it, right? I think every great musician, from the Carnatic maestros to the film music legends to the wonderful composers in both genres, to Hindustani music instrumentalists and fantastic vocalists in that space as well, all of them listen to different forms of music. I heard Lal Guri sir was, I mean, he loved Ghulam Ali Khan Saab, he loved uh, Mehdi Hassan Saab, he listened avidly to Ilaiyaraaja sir and MSV sir's songs as well. So I think, and Ilaiyaraaja sir is a big appreciator, a big student, and a big maestro of Carnatic music in his own right as well. So I think it's just being able to understand other forms of music as well, I think is the best way. And that's still something that I'm learning. Just it's not I don't think it's just through film songs. I think it's whether it's listening to a ghazal or a tumri and then noticing that nuance in another composition. I can give a good example actually of a non-Indian film song, if that makes
Please.
sense.
Yeah.
One of my favorite artists, just as far as global music is concerned, is called Mulatu Asake. One of my really good friends at NYU introduced me to him, and he is an Ethiopian jazz artist, right? Not linked with Indian music at all. And he has a piece called Tizeta. It's a very popular piece now because it was featured in films. But I remember hearing it a few years ago, and it was almost like a revelation. But it's the way the piece kind of goes is it's him on the saxophone and kind of going into bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-da da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, dun dun dun, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's more kind of it's Bhopali. That scale, it's just the pentatonic. Da-da-da-da-da, it's the pentatonic scale, but the wonders that he does with it made me think of a even like a Ramaninu Namina by the great Nayattingara Vasudevan. I implore everyone who's listening to hear his rendition of that Kriti. I think it's just things like that. Like you can find scales and modes pretty much in any form of music. Like even a raga, like there's so many different ragas that have been used in like Hungarian music and like Russian music as well. I'm forgetting the names of a few, but like I think the beauty of music is that you don't need to know one language to understand it, right? It's a sound at its core. And so when it meets language, when it meets another phrase, that's when a different part of its beauty comes out. So I think with understanding ragas and everything, it's just listening to classical concerts, listening to ghazals, listening to just any type of music that you can get your hands on. That's what I'm trying to do as of now.
Right. No.
And training, of course, compounded with that, because just learning the basic grammar of Indian classical music, what a raga is, what a thala is, learning varieties of talas, learning varieties of ragas and whatnot, from your janya ragas to your melakarta ragas, understanding what those constitute, how they derive from each other. How the janya ragas derive from the melakarta ragas. I think it's all everything kind of helps you get to that point.
Right. It, like from what you say, it's like, okay, there's an abstract system and a sound, but how do you decode it?
How
Some
do you
training
decode
and
it?
familiarity with the system itself is a good way to start, right? It's regardless of
Yeah.
whether you want to be a practitioner or just a person who wants to be able to appreciate, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I mean, hopefully, I'm not going rambling on for too long. I love to give a few examples of just my friends or even my parents. Like one of my favorite Malayalam film songs composed by Ausay Bachchan sir. Ye to var mukhilin kinavile muttai ni vannu. It's based in Sri Ragam, if I'm not wrong. And there are other Kridis in Sri Ragam as well, right? But my mom, because of that film song, she's gotten to love that ragam as a whole. And now she can recognize that ragam within other compositions as well. So it's just listening to it, listening to other types of compositions. Then she got to listening to Yendero Mahanubhavalu or the Varnam in it as well. So it's you going from, I feel like it's always like it's like a cascading effect. It's like a domino effect. The moment you start listening to one piece of music, it leads to another. It's like Wikipedia crawling almost, right? So
Right. So you spoke about the raga like Sri Ragam that you just demonstrated, and this idea of a raga alap or alapana or delineation is one of the key components really of classical music and a concert, and it's one of the very important improvisational segments. So, could you tell our viewers a little bit about, the scope for spontaneity or improvisation in a live concert? Of course, there are, compositions and, pieces that great masters have set already, but there's also a
yeah.
lot of scope for each artist to bring her own creativity to that particular performance, right? That too with a team of accompanists. So, could you talk a little about that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I mean, that's the difference between film songs and Carnatic and Hindustani music, right? Because Carnatic Hindustani music's a lot more improvised and everything kind of being set in motion, and especially with Raga Lapana is and and just Alap and Hindustani music. I mean, that is kind of the gateway. That's the introduction into the raga, and the limit, there is no limit of improvisation. I mean, as long as you stay in the scope of the raga's notes, right? Like I said, it's the way you approach those notes. Like if you sing pantuvarari, right? Like if you do alapanam and that, like mm, ah, ah, Shambho Mahadeva Shankara Girija Ramana. I mean, that's not enough raga alapana, obviously, but I'm shortening it for these purposes. But if you look at the equivalent of Panduvarali, like Puriya Dhanashri, in Hindustani music, I mean, it's slower. It's a different way, right? The way you approach the notes in the raga as well. I think with singing Raga Lapana, because you can go in Carnatic music, from what I understand, you can go from going slow to extremely fast paced brigas like like you can do things like that. I mean, you can go all over the place, as long as go all over the place in the sense you stick within those five, six, seven notes, but you show the different ways to go within it, right? Uh, Even like practicing like paltas within Hindustani music, like not even alapanam, you have to do sa re re sa re ga re ga ma ga re sa re ga ma ba da ni sa ni da ba ma ga re sa re ga ma ba ba ma ga re ga ma ba ma ba da da ba ma ba ma ga ma ba ba ma. You do different patterns as well, right? And those tend to come up in alapas, and especially sargams and long tans as well. So I think the limits are, I mean, endless to say the least. I mean, endless, and I want to emphasize, I think it's very, in my interpretation, it's you stick within that raga and you show the different ways that one can traverse through it.
Right. No, that's very, very true. And as you said, the scope for, showing the depth of a ragam is so immense in an alap segment. Sometimes it could be just a flash, say, I don't know, in writing an equivalent of a tweet or something you post in 2 lines, or it can be a long form, deep dive, and which you can sing for over an hour also, right?
Absolutely, and actually forgot to mention one thing. I think another thing that helps someone with like raga delineation, or like helping with singing a traditional classical piece, I think one of the main things is the support from your accompanists as well, right? Because that they honestly broaden the scope of improvisation within a concert, especially when you think of like within a Hindustani concert, when I if you're being accompanied by sarangi or harmonium, because you can follow their phrases and they'll come up with something different. Then the tabla player will understand, oh, that's where he's going, where he's taking it. Like if you do a bada khyal, right? Like if I sang it in Puriya Dhanashri, se sa mukuta और कानन कुंडला आशीष मुकुट. So you have, I mean, and when a harmonium player, like when you and then they follow along on the harmonium as well. Because they follow along, and then you get inspiration from what they're playing as well, or what a sarangi player is playing on their instrument. And similarly in Carnatic concerts as well, I've noticed with Carnatic vocalists, both friends and performers, like they get inspired by what the Carnatic violinist does, and even with singing swetas, right? With how the mridangam player plays, like even not, I mean, Tanyavratam comes later, but Gada pagari gari pagari sari sagari sadasa sari gapada sa sada pagari rama, like that, those type of rhythmic phrases and whatnot. Even I remember hearing like a Chembai and Yeshudas concert, where they were saying Shiva 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 Narada, and they were singing Ri ni sa ri ni sa za ni sa ni za da ni da ni pa da ma pa da ni Shiva Shiva Shiva, and TVG sir is just following the both of them on the mridangam, just with, I mean, the mridangam is almost parallel to how the swetas are being sung. And then once they did that first phrase, then they did it. Gari sari sani sari sani da pa da ni sari Shiva Shiva Shiva. So they were singing it to the mridangam as well, right? And the mridangam was being played to the singers. So things like that, I mean, it contributes to that overall environment of an Indian classical music concert.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And to think that all this happens in real time, live
That's the
and
magic. Oh
spontaneously. They haven't really had this exchange before. They are now prompting each other and sometimes teasing each other. It's so fascinating and beautiful to watch.
yeah.
Um,
No, no, especially in like jugobandis. I mean, it's amazing. Like I remember hearing I think it was an old Jugabandi of BMKG and Pandit Jasraji Bade Guruji. Um, so both of them were singing Nada Tanu Manisham Shankaram. I don't know the Kriti all that well. Namami me in Chittaranjani. And the way the both of them were singing it and the differences in how they were singing it was amazing, because they were almost playing off each other. as well in their renditions. You had Bade Gurji was singing Nada Tanu Manisham, and then you had the Carnatic classicism of a figure like BMK, Balamuli Krishna ji as well. So, I mean, it's the same thing when seeing that improvisation happen and being having had the privilege to perform alongside other artists. I mean, it is a magical experience, honestly.
Right. I don't know, Navneet, you must have heard that recording several times because I felt when you sang Nada Tanumanisham, there was a very, striking resemblance to Balamurali Krishna's tone when you sang that. So,
Oh, I appreciate the compliment, but I mean, I've heard it so many times. I've
right.
heard that entire. It's like the Music Academy 1988 cassettes. I have the recording like somewhere in like my downloads. I used to hear at some point. I mean,
Right.
quite frequently. I mean, they sang Yaman, they sang Hamsanandi Sohini in that, and they ended with this, if I'm not wrong. And
Wow.
then
Okay.
like a bhajan. So I mean, it's all. Thank you for the comparison, though, but I'm nowhere. No.
So, Navneet, a young artist like you said, you listen to these old tapes. So that, brings me to the question of how does a young practitioner like yourself equip yourself to be able to do both these components of, a classical art form, either Hindustani or Carnatic, which is that one, you have these set pieces and compositions which over time have, so many artists have sung them, interpreted them, built on them, and you have those embellished pieces. But you also have these segments for enormous spontaneity and creativity. So you have a bit of both, something that's already set and is passed on from one generation to another through gurus, and the other which gives you the chance to explore and interpret music, or rags, or compositions even in your own way. So how do you, as a young practitioner, hone that skill as you go along? What are the things that you do?
I think I don't want to sound repetitive because I think another thing that helps is I think one of the biggest thing that helps is probably trying to listen. I try to one thing that I do try to do is listen as much as I can to different compositions, different kridis, different khayals, because they will. I remember one uh, both my gurus what they kind of advise me to do when learning a raga, learning a new raga, learning a new composition. Listen to Pandit Jasraj Bade Guruji's version of that raga. I was recently going over Hamsadwani with my guru in Hindustani with my teacher, and the way in one of the and since we learned under the Mewati Gharana style, I mean he's a direct disciple of Bade Guruji Pandit Jasraji as well. So with that, he advised me to listen to that rendition of that khayal that in Hamsadwani in his way, and it's not to I think your question is in regards to like how you kind of borrow from that and
Right.
how you do both.
Assimilate, and yeah, yeah.
I think with like showcasing like your own individuality and creativity, it's you shouldn't copy, right? You have to establish your own style and things like that. But I think listening to the great masters and maestros, I think that's never a bad thing by any means because at least from my standpoint, hearing all of their music and hearing the way they've sung ragas, like hearing the way a BMK sir sings swetas in Nagumo,
Oh
the
yes.
way he sings it is very, very different from a lot of other Carnatic musicians, right? And it's when you listen to it as a listener, even for someone uh, who might not be trained in Carnatic music or in classical music at all, it sounds different. And there's like it's not only pleasant, but it's rhythmic. It's you have the best of everything, and you have the lightness, you have the softness, and you have the classicism embedded within that as well. And I think, and so many. I mean, you hear about singers being influenced by people like GNB, BMK, like all these people, but they also establish their own individual creativity because I think it's not copying them that makes it right. It's bringing your own influences and I'm gonna try to articulate this in the best way
Please.
that I can, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's almost like learning. It's another way of learning in music as well. Listening is another way of learning. I think that's the best way to put it. And I think that's what helps establish individuality, because once you listen and then you have your teachers kind of guidance on how to sing different compositions, both those combined then with your own practice as well, once you practice in your own time and you add your own quirks and tidbits to the compositions, as I mean, as regulated, then you develop your own style, in my opinion.
Right. No, you did a great job of articulating what it entails to, you know, sort of get more familiar and build on your strengths. And you were talking about, also taking guidance from your teachers. So I'm curious to understand how someone like you training today, when all this technology around us is available, you have access to old recordings, you have access to teachers via Zoom, and but how would you look at the place that a real teacher in real time is able to give you? How would you look at that experience today as you train in these systems of music?
Oh, fantastic. I know you asked, going back to the question before that as well, because I want to answer that a little bit. I think it's
Sure.
related to this with managing the both forms of music and things like that. With both my gurus, Trivandrum Krishnamurji and of course Pandit Ramesh Nayan ji as well, both of them. Uh, it's Even though yes, of course there are old recordings, and I mean, the internet is filled with information about Carnatic music and classical music that you can read and understand, to which I try to do as well with like old textbooks and like the web archive. I try to get my hands on those whenever I can and try to get some semblance of understanding of the material in that as well. But with my gurus and with learning compositions, it's they're there to correct you and they're there to guide you on how to sing, right? Because it's not just teaching you a composition and just kind of then going by the wayside, because it's not that. It's learning how to sing and learning how to pronounce each word, learning the meaning of the word. Krishnamar sir, a lot of times, I mean, both my teachers, they go through the meanings of the lyrics before we often go to the tunes and the ragas itself, because even in Indian classical music you have to apply dynamics, right? That's another huge part. You have to apply bhava, you have to apply emotions, not just when singing the raga by itself, but when you're pronouncing the words, right? And when you're singing a Tyagaraja Kirtanam or a Tansen Khayal, you have to sing it with emotion, you have to sing it with that sort of feeling as well, and they teach you how to do that, from a vocalist standpoint, and they teach you how to do that from A to Z for anything. So yeah, I mean, it's a very important thing, because from a recording you can understand the general tune, but to get to the nitty gritty details of how to sing a composition in the most proper way, the teacher is the most necessary thing.
Right. I think you're also saying that yes, recording gives you exposure to, say, like really brilliant takes on particular pieces or rags, but a recording doesn't correct you when you need to be tweaking something that you're singing. Right. Only a real guru can do that.
Only a real guru can do that, right? Because I mean, in the sense, yeah, you have, like I said, internet is filled with information, so you have old recordings and clips, and even like for me, a lot of the Carnatic ragas that I've heard, since I've learned Carnatic for only 4 or 5 years compared to Hindustani, where I've learned it for 14, 15, it's very, very different, because a lot of my Carnatic that I heard, Carnatic music was probably the first type of music that I heard when I was young. Like I still remember hearing Bhavayami Gopal Balam Manasevitam Tapatam Chintayeyam Sada Bhavayami गोपालबालं मनसेवितं तत्पथं चिन्तयेयं सदा भावय, or bhavamulona, or dolayam. Like I my mom is a huge fan of MS Subbulakshmi, so we used to listen to those kritis and compositions all the time when I was young, and even now as well. And when I before I learned Yaman Kalyan or Yamuna Kalyani or learning Kamas, I only thought of that, right? And I mean that's the thing. Once you hear those recordings, you can get a general framework. Then listening to those recordings, I think you can then have the skill to identify those recordings. But training is when you learn the specifics and learn the. And I think with music and arts, it's similar to any other concrete discipline as well, like the sciences or the humanities, right? Learning it formally and learning it through emotive instruction, it can never hurt, and it only does you better because it helps you. It's baby steps, right? So it's going increment by increment, just going, especially when learning compositions, you go note by note, word by word, and then at the end, once you've learned it fully and you practice it x amount of times, then you get a sense not only of the composition but the raga, how it should be sung, how it should not be sung. So I mean, it's a much more holistic process, yeah.
No, totally agree. I think training gives you the kind of rigor that nothing else can, and this over a long period of time really shapes artists. And I think also giving you a very strong foundation by way of grammar, right? And then you have the confidence to play around with notes and interpret it. And but you need that foundation, you need that grounding, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I still have, I'll always be a student for the rest of my life, and I think that's the beauty of it as well. Because, like I said, with music, the more you know, the more you don't know, right? There's a saying, and I think that's what I always feel like. That's a very constant feel because learning new ragas, new compositions, you also learn about what other compositions, like you hope to learn other compositions as well. So it's a very, it's, I don't want to call it a repetitive cycle because it really isn't. But when you mean the grammar of of a form, what do you mean?
By grammar, I would say, compare it to something like basic spelling or, grammar convention.
Yeah,
So, okay, if there's a rag, there is a set of notes that you employ a particular way, and usually you don't deviate from that, barring
yeah,
instances where, the raga itself allows for that kind of departure. Usually you
yeah.
stick to that. So, what I meant by grammar is to have these codes and conventions.
Codes
Yeah.
in place. Okay, okay, that makes a lot sense. Yeah, I think no, absolutely, I agree with that because that's the difference between Carnatic in Hindustani music and other forms of classical music versus lighter forms of music like film songs and ghazals, because those usually a lot of composers who are Carnatic musicians themselves as well, they choose to go out of the raga, right? Because it's a film song. There are liberties to be taken with it as well because it's not, you're not composing a film song for the purpose of it to be in a raga. Devaraja Master has always said this, right? The purpose of me composing a film song is not to show how knowledgeable I am in this or how it's for a specific situation. Even when he did Samya Maganurdhyame, a song that is purely within Karaya Priya Raga, the Raga, I mean, I cannot speak for him, right? But it probably, I don't think it was the first thing on his mind. He paid attention to the lyrics of the song, he paid attention to the situation of the song, and he paid attention to how the song was picturized, how it should be sung, what those aspects more than the raga compared to when you present a Carnatic music concert. I mean, he was a Carnatic musician for almost 12, 13, 14, 15 years before becoming a film musician, right? In those, he paid attention that the raga was the main thing. And he paid attention to the words as well, the sahityam of a kriti. So both both you do pay attention to lyrics and sahityam, but when it comes to Carnatic music, Hindustani music, raga is the king. And then with film songs, the film situation is the king.
True. And I think, yeah, the logic of each of these forms is different and they are serving a different objective while trying to, use the magic of music in their own ways, right? I think Devarajan Master would be keen to tap, the best of flavors of a particular raga if it serves the purpose of telling the story in that film better, right? I think that would have been perhaps his preoccupation rather than fidelity to a structure. And so I guess, yeah, each expression has its own logic and sensibility, and I think we're all uh, better off because there are these different options to listen to, right, rather than have just one form or one way of expressing an idea. And
Absolutely.
this brings me to what you do, Navneet, which is that I follow your social media pages where you're regularly performing and putting up shows where you are really unpacking, decoding music of masters like Baburaj and Devaraj Master and so on. And in a way, you're also trying to tell the audience what really they are doing with a particular ragam or a phrase. So I'm interested in knowing how your training as a classical musician is, giving you this lens to look at these complex film music numbers, because it's not easy to come up with something like that. They've used ragas, but they've also interpreted it in certain ways, added complex layers of chord progressions and harmonies, and the final outcome is sometimes so magical. So when you use your kind of Carnatic music algorithm in your head to decode that, what is that experience like? And conversely, how does enjoying film music as much as you do allow you also to approach classical music perhaps with a slightly different view, in the sense of sometimes the dynamics, the bhava that you hear in a film song is so moving, and you can tell that the singer has really consciously employed certain devices. For one, I'm a huge fan of SP Balasubramaniam. So every time in his music, I'm thinking, oh my God, he's doing something there with his voice, which is enhancing the, both the musical component, but also the mood, the lyrics. So how
Yeah.
do these two systems for you enrich each other as a student approaching both?
I think they both, honestly, like I said before, they bounce off of each other, at least from a listener's, from my standpoint as a listener, from my perspective. um like when I, especially when I listen to film songs mainly, I think of Carnatic renditions, I think of Hindustani renditions. um like I remember, I can give an example. I was listening to Ahir Bhairav
Right.
by, it was a jugalbandi between Brijbhushan Kabra and Shivakumar Sharma, santoor and then slide guitar. This is like one of their earliest studio recordings. I'm not sure if it's publicly available anymore, but it was, they were playing like a god, and they have a specific phrase, and it's like sa ni sa ga 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 ma pa da ni da ba ma ga re 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 ga ma ga re sa ni da ni ga re sa ni da pa da ni da ma pa da ni da sa sa re ni sa sa re ga 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 Gama gama da ba gama re re gama ga re sa. They kind of just go around those phrases for a bit. And when I thought of that, I heard of when I heard of that, I thought of two songs. രാക്കിളിതൻ വഴിമറയും നോവിൻ പെരുമഴക്കാലം, and the MS Baburaj classic വേചന തീരമേ കണ്ടുവോ നീ വിരഹിണിയാമൊരു നീ. I apologize for my mispronunciation if anything, but it's, you can see, like, I think I said this earlier before, I don't want to be repetitive, but especially with a lot of old Malayalam and Tamil, like old Malayalam, Tamil, Telugu songs, film songs, since a lot of the composers were already well trained in classical music, the raga, the classical music influences do creep in there quite a bit, and a lot of them were purists in that regard as well as Carnatic musicians, right? So they made sure that when they did use the raga, the essence of the raga was brought out. Even a composer like, composers like Dakshamurti Swami, for example, when he used uh, Karaharapriya and Uttara Swayamvaram Kadagali Kanuvan. Or in Hindi, if you look at Naushad Saab and the way he used Desi Ragan, Aaj Gavat Man Mero Jhumke Teri Taan भगवान आज गावत मन मेरो झूम के. I mean, there's so many examples of that, but I think both of them honestly just complement each other. I'm not how sure to explain it right now, but it's once I listen to, because of training and learning new ragas and compositions, I think that's allowed me to appreciate film music in a sense where like like I at least I try to understand why the composer composed it this way. Why didn't they compose it another way? What might have been in their mind as far from a musical standpoint when they made this. What might have been their influence as well. Like Devaraja Master, for example, he said, I mean, you can notice the clear influence of GNB when he was a Carnatic vocalist. His biggest influence is GNB, and in compositions like Samya Dhyaname, the way Karahara Priya is in that, you can notice the GNB Briga flavor within that composition as well, and so many other Carnatic flavored songs of Devaraja Master as well. So I think it's very hard to explain in words, but it's kind of it just as a matter of like a matter of circumstances, having classical musicians become film composers and learning chord progressions and learning how to mingle those two together, I think that's what makes a beautiful Indian film song. And then when you hear a classical concert, you hear a more in raga, in like a codified version of it, but also with more improvisation as well. So yeah.
Right. And just listening to you, I also wonder, how these film songs and really these gems from the past and also today, I think, in a sense, also democratize the art form, isn't it? I mean, because so many more people are able to access these pieces of music, and they may not necessarily think, okay, I'm listening to a Karahara Priya or an Ahir Bhairav, but there's something about that tune that moves you and takes you closer to the music. So, beyond a point, sometimes the tags and the systems become redundant or less relevant, right? It's
I'm so glad you brought that up actually, because uh, people forget that classical music was only really consumed by the Maharajas, right? Usually, classical musicians were court musicians at that point. I'm talking pre, what do you call it? Independence India, right? If we're talking like about classical music and its political significance. And I'm sure you know very well, you know very much about that, but with how classical music, I think film music that's employed Carnatic and Hindustani ragas, I think that has democratized classical music, and I'm all for it because Naushad Saab actually said this in one of his interviews online. I think it's still there. He says very very notably within the interview that with his decision to put classical music, to incorporate ragas into the Baiju Bawara soundtrack, was a very purposeful and intentional one, because he knew the moment that he did that, then classical music could be heard by millions of listeners, and that's the thing, because you popularize even Devaraja Master. That's what he tried to do. He took the hardest parts of a raga and made it lighter. He made it applicable to a lighter context. That's why Samya Dhyaname people still associate with Malayali people know that Samya Dhyaname is Karahira Priya, Uttara Swayamvaram is Karahira Priya, Ambala Parambile is Begada, based off of these film songs. And 150 years ago, you didn't have that. You still had these ragas in place, right? And you had compositions in those. But film songs, the beauty of them is the fact that they do democratize it. You're absolutely right in that. And it will hit a listener, like, I mean, it'll really instantly attract them because it's just 3-4 minutes on an average, right? But it brings out the lightest and the most classist like places of the raga as well within that, because that's what film music is, right? You're trying to kind of get that within a 3-4 minute time frame. So yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, you mentioned Karahar Priya a few times, and what we know as something, to be what we know as classical, something we know as a very classical raga, in fact, can be traced to very folk sounds. So there are, very stark examples that, classical musicians have cited in very traditional folk music that has distinct strains of Karahar Priya, for instance. So I think all art forms are living and breathing art forms that evolve, absorb. They are so malleable in that sense, right? So not some rigid boxes that, yeah,
No, no, absolutely. I mean, I talked about like I mentioned before about Ethiopian jazz, even like Russian music, Hungarian music, even like there, yeah, Karahara Priya and like Harikamboji Mohanam, they were known as like puns, right? They were using like ancient Tamil folk, not folk music, but ancient Tamil music, like the poems of Tirunjana Sambandar. And even like there's one, like even Yadukula Kamboji, there's
absolutely.
one like M. Dandapani Desikar, the Carnatic musician. He sang like one Tevaram, like Tevaram, like it's a தொண்டரஞ்சு களீரும் தொண்டரஞ்சு களீரும், like it's in Yadugula Kamboji, and I that's a Tirunjana Sambandar poem from almost like we're talking like six. I don't want to say almost like the AD, like before. I mean, like thousands of years ago. We're talking about, right? So it's music is a very notes and sound have been there since the beginning of time, right? But what distinguishes it is the different approaches. That's what mankind has done over that period of time, and obviously the different terminologies. Carnatic music, Hindustani music. People forget Hindustani music. It came from Afghanistan. It came like not even necessarily from North. It came from Pakistan, Afghanistan. Then it made its way down. That's why even you have ragas like Pahadi. Pahadi
Absolutely.
is, I mean, Pahadi is like, if I'm not wrong, it's like a hilly area, literally. If you
Absolutely.
look at the context, right? And you listen to the way Pahadi is sung, it's not used in very heavy classical compositions. You mainly see it in Tumris or like Mar Dala, Mar Dala, Najariya Mila ke Mar Dala. Gabadaba gazari gasapada sapa Mar Dala. Like if you listen to Pandit Ajoy Chakraborty ji's rendition of this, he sings like an alaparam, which is literally almost like as if it's coming out of like a mountain range, like Mardio Wado Pia. Or if you listen to Shivakumar Sharmaji's rendition of Pahadi or
Oh, yeah.
Hariprasad Chaurasia's rendition of Pahadi on flute, it's so different. And that's when you have like in Hindustani music, I'm forgetting the term, but you have like different lighter pieces in that regard as well that are influenced. Even Tumri was people forget it was a music that was done for like courtesans like of the court and whatnot before, and then it became introduced into classical music. So I mean everything almost influences everything else to like a like to different extents. So yeah.
Right, and because you mentioned Pahadi, my entry point to Pahadi was really a Tilana composed by Lalguri sir in the Raga. And it's only
Uh-huh.
that which led me to so many other Pahadis by the great masters. And yeah, it's such a beautiful and visually evocative Raga, really, that it can transport you almost geographically to another plane, right? It's quite fascinating, the effect of that.
Yeah, especially like even I talked about I mentioned Hariprasad Chaurasia's rendition of Pahadi and whatnot. He specifically in one of in a movie's background score, I think that him and Shivakumar Sharma ji, they were both of them composed. There's like the I think it's a silsila background score. You can hear this like constantly through the background, like of the different scenes and whatnot behind the actors. It makes all the effect. It amplifies like the experience, not only watching the movie, but also listening to the songs as well. Like even when you hear "Dekha ek khab to ye silsile hue," even that's a mix of Bhopali and Pahadi. I
Right.
mean, it takes you to another level. Yeah.
So, Navneet, I just thought I'd ask you if there's a particular song or piece of music that's now currently earworm for you and that you're listening to a lot or singing a lot, and would you like to share that with us before we wrap up?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a lot of music that I've been listening to. I guess within like since I'm here and whatnot, I Kendrick Lamar released a new album, so I've been listening
Okay.
to that. More on the non-Indian music side of things. But if I actually, I was listening to a Tamil song recently. It's an old MSV song. I found it through like one of my favorite Hindi songs is Aja Re Pardesi. And I was hearing, I think, Raja sir talk about how MSV and TK Ramamurthy, how they got influenced by that. And they made Padirukum பழமிருக்கும் பசிருக்காது பஞ்சணையில் காற்று வரும் தூக்கம் வராது பஞ்சணையில் காற்று வரும் தூக்கம் வராது. That's one song I've been listening to a lot recently. I love the like the little humming bits, especially பாலிருக்கும்
Oh, yes.
பழம் இருக்கும் பசி இருக்கா பஞ்சணையில் காற்று வரும் தூக்கம் வராது தூக்கம் வராது. So yeah, that's one song I've been listening to recently.
Right. No, it's beautiful. And sometimes we think, simple is easy or simple is, boring, but this would come across as a simple, relatively simple tune. But look at how powerful and moving it is, no?
It's
Amazing.
still and it was made like 63 years ago.
Yeah.
That's the beauty. And actually, another few things I've been listening to a lot of new Malayalam songs as well, especially those of Sushin Shyam. I'm a big fan of his. So he like his Avesham soundtrack and whatnot
Right.
has been in my ear for the last year.
Wow. Okay. Lovely. No, and like you pointed out, those little nuggets, like, a little humming here or a tiny chord progression in a very subtle
It'll make
way.
all the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Really, the color and the character really changes, and it's quite
It,
addictive.
it it'll elevate the song even before Parikum. I don't want to ramble for too long. Even like
No, no,
da na
ramble away. It's a lovely song.
na 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 da 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 da. That entire song is in the BGM, but the main three notes is the vibraphone. Pum 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 pum. பாலிருக்கும் பழமிருக்கும். I love the intro. No, it's amazing.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful. No, it would, I think we can cover several of these compositions and, songs as we go forward, Navneet. But I think we have to bring today's chat to a close. And I really want to thank you for taking time, especially I know you're in the middle of exams, and really appreciate your sparing time to chat with us, and also how articulate you are in communicating ideas that are usually considered abstract and the domain of experts, but really enjoyed talking to you and listening to you and your interpretations of these different songs, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much, Mira, for extending the opportunity. I appreciate it. I had a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Navneet. And so, to our viewers, please tell us what you thought of this chat. If you have any feedback, suggestions, do write to us. And we really hope to bring you several artists like Navneet, who are young and are really doing very interesting work, but with enormous training and commitment. So we hope to bring you several more such artists. And thank you so much for tuning in.